everyone. Welcome to the Ashley Barlow Company podcast. I'm Ashley Barlow, your host. If you are a parent, a teacher, or someone who works at a school, or you're a community member, a volunteer, or a staff member at an organization that supports people with special education plans, a coach, a tutor, or even a grandparent, you're in the right place. Sit back with an ice cold glass of lemonade, put on your walking shoes and grab some headphones, roll down the windows and cruise. Ready, set, go. Educate, advocate, collaborate. Welcome back to the Special Education Advocacy Podcast with Ashley Barlow. I'm Ashley Barlow, and I'm so happy you're here. Friends, happy anniversary. 1 year ago this week, I started Ashley Barlow Company. We are on episode number 53 of the podcast. Holy cow, we made it to a year. This has been such an absolute honor and pleasure. I have enjoyed getting to meet so many of you. I love it when you reach out. I love it when you send feedback. I have so enjoyed interacting with some of you in the Special Education and Advocacy Lab. I really look forward to bringing you the ABC course, which is going to train people to be paid special education advocates. That's coming in October. And I just have absolutely loved this company. Yes, it's been crazy managing a law firm, practicing law, and also starting a business while homeschooling my child. But holy cow, has this been ever so rewarding. I wanted to reward you. I wanted to treat you for our anniversary. And so I really thought hard about how I was going to plan the podcast as a little celebration. And what I came down to was what we really need is we need some self-care, but we need it in a way that also gets stuff done. And so I thought, gosh, who could I bring on that will help my audience to learn more and to be more effective and more efficient? And I immediately thought of Tina B. Tina Beauvais is a life coach, and she works a lot with parents of children that have disabilities. She is a parent in our community herself, and I absolutely love what she puts out on Instagram. And so I contacted her and said, hey, could you do a series for my audience for my anniversary? And she graciously accepted. So here we go with Tina B. I want to tell you a little bit about her. Tina Beauvais is a life coach and an inclusion advocate. She is an athlete herself and takes so much joy in coaching her high school athletes, parents of children with disabilities, and her own children. Tina's journey in advocacy began when her daughter Noelle was born with muscular dystrophy. Tina utilized the skills and traits she had developed as an athlete to advocate for Noelle in her first few weeks of life, honing them as she and Noelle grew up together. Tina lives in Colorado with her big, beautiful, blended family. She sells beautifully created merchandise over at Be Kind, Live Kind, and I will give the link to her shop in my show notes. And she promotes inclusive practices and has lots of coaching strategies on Instagram over at Tina B_disability inclusion ed. I'll give you that handle as well in the show notes. Enjoy. This is a 3-part series, part 1 coming up. Hi, Tina.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you for joining me. You are such a light. You're one of my favorite friends on Instagram. I actually find myself searching for you to get updates on things or to see what you're up to. So I'm really excited for you to share both your story and your professional expertise with my audience. Why don't we go ahead and get started with an introduction? So just tell us about yourself, about your family, your passion for advocacy.
All right. Yeah. So I am Tina B. My last name's Beauvais, which is a little tricky. So that's why I go by Tina B. Makes it easier. My husband, Dustin, and I have been married for almost 12 years. and we're a blended family. So when we met, I had Noelle, who is diagnosed with muscular dystrophy. She was 2 at the time, and he had 2 kiddos who were 2 and 4. And we, became an instant family, basically. And then we have had 2 kiddos together. So Bo and Macy, we had Macy 7 years after I had Macy 7 years after I had Noelle. And yeah, we're just a very high energy family. We're always doing fun things, crazy adventures. We have taken our daughter Noelle, who's in a wheelchair, I say, to the tops of mountains and to oceans, because we really just, sometimes maybe we're a little on the crazy side, but that's okay. We love to do anything fun, and we try to not let her disability limit us in the things we can do as a family. And I have been obviously in the disability community, I would say, since Noelle was born, and she'll be 15 this year. So it's been 15 years for me kind of walking this journey and on this path.
So cool. And there's so much to learn from you through your journey. I know you have learned a lot because I have followed along with that on social media. What we really want to talk about in this series with you is we want to get some good information from you, because you are a life coach, and I think a lot of my audience members might actually be interested in doing that themselves, because as we experience life and life builds perspective in us, I think we as parents and people that love people with disabilities have a lot to share. And that might be something that people are interested in. And I also know that I myself, and certainly a lot of my audience members, have a lot to learn. So we're going to get to that. But first, I wanted to talk about kind of your story with Noelle, Noelle's birth story, how you kind of came to be this advocate. So why don't you tell us about Noelle's birth?
Yes, and sorry if you hear, trucks or cars in the background. I'm actually at a local coffee shop that didn't open yet, and so I'm sitting in the courtyard, and there's a lot of motorcycles driving past, but that's okay.
I haven't heard one motorcycle, and
that's great.
Yeah, well, and that's kind of the goal here, is that people feel like they're sitting outside at a coffee shop with us, hanging out. So it's good.
Perfect. All right, I'm glad you haven't heard it yet. So yeah, so actually, Noelle's birth story is a little crazy. I was actually running college track when I found out I was pregnant with Noelle. I was in not a very great relationship, and actually track was kind of what I do think was going to save me from that. But I ended up finding out I was pregnant. So I had to stop running track, and I continued in this not great relationship, because really at the time I didn't know what else to do. And when I was pregnant with Noelle, I never knew that anything was wrong, because she was my first baby, so I didn't have anything to compare it to. I did at one point, I wasn't feeling her move, so I went in to get a checkup, and they hooked me up to the monitors, and they could hear all of her movements. So they were like, well, that's a movement, and that's a movement. And so I guess I just thought, okay, new mom, don't know what this feels like. When really, had I have had another child first, I would have known that Noelle was just very weak and not really kicking or moving. It felt like indigestion, really. It didn't feel like a baby kicking. But it wasn't until she was born that I knew that something was wrong. And, I always say, I used to watch the show Bringing Home Baby on TLC, because that's what you do when you're pregnant, you watch baby shows. And so I was like ready for when the baby comes out, and then the room erupts with all of this energy and excitement. Well, when Noelle was born, and she was born through C-section, when she was born, the room was silent. And that's never a good thing. You're like, what's happening? How come the baby's not crying? Nobody's talking. So it was from the beginning, I knew that something was wrong. And we didn't know for the first few weeks if it was just a rough delivery or what. But innately, I kind of knew in my spirit that there was something. And I went back to the TLC shows and was like, did anybody's baby, were they born like her? And you're just always searching for somebody else whose story is similar to yours. And I never found that. But Noelle was diagnosed at 5 months with muscular dystrophy. And the reason she got that diagnosis so young was she needed a feeding tube. She was unable to gain weight on her own. So they ended up doing a muscle biopsy, but usually they wouldn't have done it that young. And, as hard as it was to hear the news, honestly, my first reaction was, well, she could still be in the Special Olympics. And that's just how I, kind of dealt with it. And honestly, at this point, there's sometimes I'm like, well, maybe I should say it was more dramatic than that I was crying and there was tears. But honestly, that's just, my approach at the time was like, okay, well, we'll figure it out. And I mean, not that every moment and every step of the journey has been easy, like not at all. But that was just kind of my response. And kind of, I think what kind of set the tone for her whole life and the whole journey. And there's been a lot of searching of how did I get that, response? Was that something I was taught? Is that something I innately just had? And, as we continue to talk through coaching and stuff, I'll kind of elaborate on it. But that kind of in a nutshell is Noelle's birth story.
I think that's like the secret. I had a very similar reaction to our diagnosis of Down syndrome. I said, okay, what do I do next? And I have thought a lot about that too. Is that just my personality? Is it something I was taught? And I think I know the answer for myself. But I think there's so much to learn from somebody like you that has then created that experience into a business. So that's really, really neat. Do you think, I'm so fascinated by the maturity, because how old were you when you had her?
I had just turned 22.
Okay.
Or wait, no, actually I was 21. So I was 21 when I found out I was pregnant. And so I was still 21 when I had her because she was born in November. And I didn't turn 22 till that February. And yes, I look back and I'm surprised at my maturity as well, because now I'm, much older when I had my younger two kids, I'm like, I don't even know how I did it, because there's days when I'm like, I don't even know what I'm doing. But yes, there was a maturity I didn't even realize I had at the time.
Right. I mean, and did you realize that you were growing up as it was happening?
I do know that the moment I got the test that said I was pregnant, it was like, okay. And I mean, I had a different experience than most, because my older brother, him and his girlfriend ended up getting pregnant in high school. And so I learned early on what I didn't want to do. And yeah, I ended up doing it because I didn't want to have kids early. But so I think having walked that and seen it firsthand, I knew right away it was like, okay, this is what I'm doing. And I've got to be there, for my child, and I've got to do it. And even in a bad relationship, it was like, I've got to do my best to try to make it work for my baby. And yeah, it just kind of was there wasn't any other choice in it. And then when I found out she had a disability, it was even more. I know this is so crazy, but like, I'm somebody who does really well in tough situations and in hard times. And I do look back now and I wonder, would I have been the same mom if Noelle didn't have all the needs? I think it actually would have been harder on me. There would have been a whole lot more room for selfishness and room for, not wanting to grow up. And as crazy as it is, it was a blessing in disguise for me to have, such a, extreme kind of version of motherhood at such a young age.
I love that. And I want to explore that more. And maybe we will as we continue to talk, but I think that's so true. I say that all the time, that I feel like having Jack made me such a better person, has really developed my perspective and my intuition and my empathy so much more significantly. And so I love that you said you didn't have room for selfishness. You didn't have room to continue as an adolescent that's probably pretty egotistical. I mean, college athlete. And so, can you really pinpoint ways that you had to kind of abandon this prior life and really dedicate yourself to her health and well-being and development?
Yeah, so Noelle was flight for life the day after she was born. She was born in a small town hospital. We're in Colorado, so she was born in a small town hospital, and it was very clear early on that they didn't know what they were doing. So we had a talk that she needed to go somewhere else, and at the same time we had made that decision, the doctors walked into the room and said, "We think she needs to be seen somewhere else." And we're like, "So do we." And they're like, "Well, the flight for life is on the way." And in that moment, they're like, "Well, we don't know if you're going to be able to ride the plane or not with her. You just have to wait till the pilot gets here and ask." And there was that moment of like, I can't not ride this plane. It was a 4.5 hour drive. And I was like, I have to be on that plane. And it was, I think, even that moment of like, okay, like I can't be like a bawling, like a bawling or a hormonal crazy person. I have to be, show them that like, I can ride this plane. I can be there. I mean, I just had a C-section, and I remember just waiting for that pilot and being like, okay, I have to do whatever it takes to get on that plane. And thankfully the pilot walked in, and I asked him if I could ride with, and he said, "Yep, you can." And I was just like, okay. And there was a flight for life nurse, and she told me, she's like, "I never freak out ever. So if you see me freaking out, something's wrong." And I'm like, okay, sounds good. And when you descend into Denver over the mountains, there is so much turbulence, and let alone on a tiny little Learjet. So we start descending, and I'm in my seat looking around, Noelle's in her isolette, and I'm looking at that nurse, and she's just charting. And so I'm like, okay, we're good, because she said we're good. And even in that moment, it was like I had to choose if I was going to let my emotion take over, my fear and anxiety, or if I was going to look ahead, like to that person who was constant. And that's what I did. I'm like, okay, I don't know what's happening, I don't trust all of this, but this person is leading the way, and I'm trusting her. And then it was from the beginning. Noelle was at Children's for the first 2 weeks of her life, and that in and of itself is a whole experience of learning how to do all of the things and back and forth. And so as much as like I said, back to the whole TLC thing, I imagined my story of motherhood was going to be sitting at home nursing a baby. It wasn't. It was sitting in a hospital room, and it was appreciating the little things. And if you've ever been in the NICU, there's so many little things that literally just like melt your heart. And I remember one thing was I got a paper bag with some peaches and a spoon and some snacks, and inside it had a little note, and it said, "From a family who's been in your shoes, who knew how important it was to have, to be thought about and have a snack." And it was just like, oh my gosh. And so those little moments, as much as I never planned on experiencing them, those started to shape me and make me appreciate this journey I was on, even though it wasn't what I, had originally planned. So it's like from the very beginning, there was always the option, I think, to choose to appreciate it, or the option to just be so mad about it. And thankfully I chose the option of just, appreciating it and realizing that it was going to refine me and make me a better person.
Yeah. I mean, and I think the neat thing about this is that even in that moment, you were learning how to refine yourself while also caring and advocating for another person, for this really deserving baby that just burst into your life. And that is something that we as parents of kids with disabilities don't oftentimes do supernaturally. And so I was just like writing down, it's a choice. It is truly a choice. There is this framework shift where you have to think, okay, I'm going to be deliberate about this positive approach that I can take and this growth opportunity that can happen. And so like the actual positivity itself is a choice. And the like letting go, you talked about turning her over to the doctors and saying, okay, they know what's best. That's a choice. And sometimes we feel like we need to control everything. the like, I'm going to learn everything I can learn is a choice. You know, so many times, like, we just want to kind of let things, this is not me, but we as a community want to let things kind of like, okay, well, I just can't learn about that. I can't learn about school, or I can't learn about whatever. It's too much. But there's a choice that you can make to say, I'm going to dive into this and I'm going to learn. And then the last thing you said was that awareness of like the small things and the opportunity, the community, the beauty that exists, whether it's directly related to Noel or Noat or not, Noel or Noat. That could be a new hashtag. You could like break down stereotypes with a Noel or Noat. Does Noel, can she ice skate or Noat?
Yes.
Well, yeah, she can. I like it. So, but you know, I mean, that awareness of the beauty of life is such a gift that's so cool. I like, as you were saying that, I was breaking it down into a lesson for myself, and I love it. So thank you. Okay, so I love that your first kind of two advocacy pieces of A, she needs to go someplace else, and B, I need to be on that airplane were like slam dunks. You didn't even have to really work. But I'm sure there was a time that it set in that, oh gosh, I'm really going to have to advocate for her. Can you kind of tell us about that?
Oh yeah, so that came early on. So when Noelle got discharged from children, she had a feeding tube, like an NG tube, and oxygen, and that was still in that place of like, I don't know if it's denial or hope or what it is, but it was like, she's going to be fine. She's going to be fine. It was a rough delivery. She's going to be fine. And yet I still innately knew in my spirit there was something, you know, very wrong. And I know that's probably something most parents who have a child with a disability or a diagnosis can understand. It's like you're living in both of these worlds of like hoping that the doctors are wrong, hoping that you're not actually going to see it, and yet kind of knowing that there is something. And so I had to try to get her to gain weight. Her pediatrician took the feeding tube out very early, which of course we thought at the time, like, yes, this is a great thing. And then I spent the next 4 months like trying with everything in me to get her to just eat a tiny bit. And we had nurses who came, I think it was once a week, to weigh her, like to do well checks in the home. And every week it was almost like my ability as a mom was on the line. You know, like, was she going to make the weight or wasn't she? And did I do enough or didn't I? And it was just constant. And it would feel like, you know, if she gained weight, yes, it was a victory. I did great. If she didn't, it was like, oh gosh, I just can't do it. And it's like, of course we all feel that at times as parents. It's just sometimes we see it more often when we have a kid with a disability, because it's like I said, it's just this constant report card of how are you doing? And it was like at 4 months, I came to go see my family, and they live in Blackhawk, which is closer to Denver. And she just wasn't doing well. She wasn't eating. I could tell she was lethargic. So I took her into Children's to get checked out, and she had lost 9 ounces in a week. And I'm just like, you know, it doesn't seem big for, you know, it's probably typical of like some kids, but for her, I was like, oh my gosh, this is months of work. And at that hospitalization, they were about to discharge her. They were about to just send her home. And I had to put my foot down, you know, and that was one of those moments when I was crying and, you know, just like, it wasn't the most eloquent side of advocacy. And somebody walked in the room and I was like, you have to do something. Like, we can't leave. And this was after sitting in a room for basically 2 days with nobody doing anything. And, you know, you think people are doing stuff. You think somebody must be doing something for you, which no, you're really literally just sitting in a room. I know that now. And, you know, most people who've had to be in the hospital often know. And so I, you know, bawling, crying, you have to do something. And so they finally listened to me. And that was when they decided to give her a feeding tube. And that's also when they did the muscle biopsy. But I was like, they were ready to just send her home. And I was going to be back to this, like, every single hour, just, you know, overwhelmed with, is she eating? Is she not? And at the time, really what was happening was she was burning more calories than she was consuming because of her muscular dystrophy. And so she really did need a feeding tube. She couldn't do it on her own. And so that was the first moment of, the advocacy where I had to put my foot down and be like, no, you need to help her. Like, this is not. So it came very early on at 4 months.
And, I think a lot of people will be able to relate to that, because I'm thinking about like a really big time that I had to advocate for Jack. And it was super messy. I mean, I remember saying I got really mad and I was crying and snotting, and it was crazy. And I remember saying, there was this room full of 19 other people. It was in an IEP meeting. And I said, I'm so sorry. I don't get mad very often. And so I think I'm having this emotional response because mad isn't something that I feel. And we were just waiting for the paperwork. And I felt like I got to get out of here because I'm making a mess out of myself. But what's interesting is 2 people have since sent me referrals, sent me people they want for me to mentor and that sort of thing, and said, you were so eloquent in that meeting, and your passion was so obvious. And I felt like I didn't know what the heck I was doing. And now I'm able to put it into something that's much more objective for other people and for my own family. But I think a lot of us start in that like messy, crying kind of phase, and we realize we need something that's more effective, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So where then did you get those tools to advocate in an objective manner?
Oh man, I would just say it was refined through the fire. It was those little situations continually happening over and over and over. And it was that maturity. When I first had her, there was a lot of maturity that came, and then there was a lot of maturity that was learned over time. And I think it's understanding the dynamic of, hospital and doctors. I mean, I learned to speak doctor, so that way I would be, I would be seen as not an equal, but at least it is an intelligent part of the conversation.
Right.
At one point, Noelle was in the hospital for 4 months straight. So there was a lot of opportunity to learn to speak the language of the hospital, a lot of opportunity to learn to advocate. And, when you're consumed with that, I mean, I didn't leave. I slept day in, day out in the hospital. So it was like I was immersed in this culture. And I think a lot of it too is trial and error. It was, those moments when we do break down and we're crying and all of that. And even if our message gets across, and even when people, give us the pat on the back for doing it, when we walk away and then how we feel about it. And when we feel like, oh my gosh, I feel like I just threw a fit in front of all these people. And even though they finally heard me, it's like, okay, next time I want to do it better. And I think it's doing it better for ourselves, because living in that place is not easy by any means. Living in that place of having to advocate. And there's still times when, advocacy does look messy, because you can't get your point across any other way, unfortunately.
Right.
But it's finding better ways along the way. And when you say IEP meetings, oh my gosh, I'm sure that brings up so many emotions for all of us. So many different, times of like, oh, I did this one good, and then this one I did not do good. But so I do think that unfortunately, there's moments where advocacy has to look messy, because otherwise people aren't going to listen to you, because they don't live your life. They don't really know. As much as doctors or educators think that they know, they don't come home with us. They haven't walked with our children every day, day in and day out. And so as much as their professional, opinion is trying to understand you, sometimes it does take some messiness. But when those times are fewer and farther between, and we can still advocate in better ways, I think that helps us. It helps our child. It helps them get what they need, because we can't just cry and scream and throw a fit in every appointment. Nobody's going to even listen to us. So I think refining those advocacy skills are what we have to do for our kids and for ourselves. Because like I said, I don't want to live in that all the time. And somebody told me this recently. They're like, I don't like how I get, like, I feel ugly. Like, that's not me. And it's like, yeah, to avoid that ugly feeling is really good. And like you said, when you're like, you felt like you were so angry and mad, and it's almost that ugly feeling. It's like, we can advocate, and sometimes we do have to, get stern, but the goal, I think, should be to not have to do it in that, like when we walk away, we don't have to feel that ugly side of us, you know?
So beautiful. There's so many good little nuggets of information in that. And I couldn't agree with you anymore. That's the way that I teach my students. That's the way I advocate for my clients and my law practice. And I think it's so, so effective. So I guess that eventually led to you thinking, I'm pretty good at this. Maybe I should try coaching, right? So tell us about your journey as a coach.
Yeah, so my journey as a coach really does stem from athletics first and foremost. And that does, the more I have really, thought about this concept of coaching, I really realized that yes, there's a lot of mindset that I have that was just given, that I just have always had an ability to reframe. And I do think that that's a very strong mindset ability. I can reframe anything, no matter how bad a situation is, I can look at it and be like, okay, so I'm going to see it this way. And that's something I've always innately had, but then it was really refined through athletics. The first time I started playing sports was in 7th grade when my family moved from Albuquerque to Colorado, and they offered, it was a really tiny school, so they offered sports class to middle schoolers. And I'm like, what sports class? Okay. And you actually took it as the last hour of your day, and it was your athletic practice, and we did volleyball, basketball, and track. So I remember walking in, it was mid-November, so I walked into people doing layups. I don't even know if I had ever dribbled a basketball before this, but I'm just like, okay. And I was just looking at the people in front of me and dribbling and doing my best to attempt layups. And it was very early on in athletics that I saw, I saw the power that a coach has over somebody's life and the influence that they have. And I came from a family very emotionally disconnected, very devoid of very, positive things or just affirmation or encouragement. So when I found somebody who was encouraging me because I could dribble a basketball or because I could play defense so well, it really just spoke to my heart, and it really started to make me want to do better and do more things. And so it really was in 7th grade that I knew I wanted to coach. Like, there was no doubt in my mind, and it never wavered all through high school sports. And I always joke because we never brought home a state trophy, we never had a winning season, but I had some amazing coaches, and I come from a long line of amazing coaches. And actually, 2 of my high school coaches still coach to this day. And I am a varsity basketball coach, and I actually have coached against my former high school basketball coach. And being able to do that is such an incredible opportunity. Also very intimidating because I'm like, do I beat him or what do I do? Right now our record is like 1-1. So, it's left to be decided.
Oh, you and your coach, your record is 1-1. Okay, I like it. That's nice and fair.
We scrimmaged them once and beat them, and then in a regular season game we've beat them, and then this last season they beat us. So this year we're coming back.
Okay, that's good. They're coming for you, coach.
Yes. And so I was actually in college majoring in coaching when I found out that I was pregnant with Noelle, and obviously I never had the opportunity to go back to school after I had her, and so it was once I got pregnant with Macy, so Noelle was 7, there was actually a coaching job, and I applied for it in our community. It was at a small Christian school. And over the phone, I'm talking to the athletic director, and he said, well, wait a minute, when did you play? And I told him, he's like, I was coaching at that time. And he's like, wait, are you a short brunette guard? And I was like, yes. He's like, oh, I totally remember you. And so my tenacity and just who I was, the fire that I brought as an athlete, was something he remembered over the phone. And over the phone, basically, he gave me the job because he knew who I was as an athlete and knew what I would bring as a coach. And so that's really how I got my first professional coaching job. And from that moment on, like, knowing that a coach can help take somebody, this is what the definition of coach was. A coach in the old days was, the buggy, the carriage that took people there, the coach. And it really takes somebody from where they are to where they want to go. And being able to do that in people's lives is really my passion and what I want to do. I've done it in high school athletes and seeing them go from, this shy freshman who's very unsure to a college athlete has been an amazing opportunity. And over the last few years, I've taken professional coaching and been able to realize, oh, I can do this for adults too now. Like now I can do it. It's one thing to be able to do it for somebody, in a high school setting and through sports, but now to offer it to people in life. And once I walked through mentorship and coaching myself, it was like, duh, of course I need a coach. Like I know what it's done in my life. Like, could you imagine a basketball team without a coach? Like they wouldn't get very far. And it was kind of like I had that revelation in my life, like, well, no wonder I'm not getting farther than I want. I need help. I need a coach. I need accountability. And so it's like, as much as I've done like a lot on my own, and it's like almost all these loose ends that I, am good at in these different areas, a coach just kind of wraps that all together and helps you to put them all together and move forward, with it all in line, instead of just feeling like you're kind of out here floating on your own. It's that accountability and that help to continue to move you forward.
Yeah. And there's so much value in that. And I, growing up as an athlete, felt really connect to that concept. My brother swam. I was injured in high school, so I wasn't able to swim in college, but my brother did. And when he graduated from college, he was like, this will be the first time since I was 4 years old that I haven't had a coach. And so he got oops, sorry, my Siri just picked up. And so when he graduated from college, he got a dog and he named him Coach, because he was like, how am I going to live without a coach? So that definitely kind of rings true to me. I imagine there are some themes that kind of come up in the human experience. I wonder if you could share with us maybe one or even two different themes that come up as you're coaching adults, and or if there's like common pointers that you think everybody could benefit from as they navigate the stresses of adult life.
Yeah, it's funny you say the stresses of adult life, because I think the common theme for anybody goes back to our childhood and goes back to our little kid, kind of voice, or who we were as a child and how we started to cope in the world, and those strategies that we had to have at the time because we were kids and we didn't have any other options, so they became our coping mechanisms. We also call that our ego. And that's what took care of us then. And that's what protected us. But unfortunately, as adults, we don't even realize it, but we're still living out of those same coping mechanisms, but they don't serve us because we're not a little child who needs to be protected, who needs to, and also, if you think of your own kids, it's like sometimes kids just perceive things not the best way. Like, maybe we perceive something to be different than it was. This is funny, but my mother-in-law told me the other day that as a child, she went to go see her great grandma in a nursing home, and she was retaining a lot of fluid and everything. And so her grandma or her mom kept telling her, like, yeah, grandma's just blown up. Like, she's just a balloon. Like, and so this was a word that her mom was using. And then when she saw it as a little kid, she's like, my grandma's a balloon, and so it's just, could you imagine what she thought when she walked in? And who knows, I don't know what the grandma actually looked like, but it's like, as a child, we just, we only can understand so much. And so it's like, even though we were protecting ourselves and we created this, maybe we did perceive things in the wrong way. Maybe we defended ourselves more than we needed to, or whatever it may be. But if we're still living out of those same things as an adult, that's why, we're struggling in our marriages, or why we're struggling with relationship or whatever, because we're still using those same coping mechanisms and those strategies that we had as a child, and now they don't serve us. And I think that is very universal. I would say all of us struggle with that. And, and it's like, is this serving me? Why am I protecting myself this way? Why, my ego, why is it coming up this way? And it's like, because we didn't go back to that, little kid version of yourself and kind of, uncover it and unpack it. And that's what we always do in like our second or third session, is go back to that and start to unpack it. And one thing my coach asked me, which I think this is so powerful, is imagine yourself as the 7-year-old version of Tina. And he's like, you have a 7-year-old, Macy. Imagine Macy living your life when you were a child. And that was that really got me, because it's one thing to think of ourselves, but it's another thing to think of your child living your own childhood. And what did that look like? And good, bad, ugly, and different. You got to start from there to kind of think about like, okay, how did I get to where I'm at now? And that was really, I think, the thing, especially because I don't know if you do Enneagram at all, but like I'm a 7 on the Enneagram, and we just try to avoid pain at all costs. Right. So for me, it's like, I didn't think I had a hard childhood. I didn't think it was painful until I looked at it through that lens of what would it look like if Macy lived my childhood? And then it was like, oh gosh. And I think that's really, a common thing that we all need to reconcile is our childhood and how that impacts our adulthood.
That is so enlightening, and something I haven't thought about it. Like the way you just walked us through that will make me think all day. That was super, super helpful and powerful. And I have to say, when you first started talking, I was like, yeah, that's like my inner badass. And then the more you started talking, I was like, oh, I have to think a little on that. Gosh, that is so, so helpful. And, I think particularly we as parents of children that have disabilities really get kind of stripped of a lot of our defenses. And so when we're stripped of our defenses, we probably do revert back to that ego, to that original personality, those original personality traits, because they are comfortable. That's what's been with us the longest. And I definitely see myself going back to that version of myself when I am most raw, when life has really kind of stripped away any intentionalism that I can have. And so that really makes me think a lot about self-care and how I need to protect myself so that I can show up to be the best me and not show up to be the 7-year-old me, who was pretty boisterous. Tina, this is amazing. I cannot wait for you to come back for a second episode. Man, we are making some good progress. The next time we get together, if you'll come back for a second episode, I would love to kind of dig more into kind of that chaotic life of parents of children with disabilities. So let's take a break here and promise an episode number 2 coming up soon.